On behalf of our university, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you to our members' preview day. Now, this afternoon, we celebrate the opening of our fall exhibitions, New England Sky, comprising recent work by our esteemed faculty member, Alston Conley, who I saw here just a few minutes ago. Nature's Mirror, Reality and Symbol in Belgian Landscape, and Esteban Liza, The Abstract Cabinet. Now, we have two lectures this afternoon by the curators of the latter two exhibitions, and I'll be introducing each of them. By way of introduction of our first speaker, Jeffery Howe, I'd like to provide a little bit of the backstory of Nature's Mirror. The exhibition started life in Jeffery Howe's lifelong study of Belgian symbolist art. And it began with his dissertation and subsequent book in 1982 on one of the movement's most celebrated and mysterious artists, Fernand Knopf, who plays a starring role in the current exhibition. Throughout his distinguished career as a scholar and professor of art history at Boston College, Professor Howe maintained a close relationship with an inspired, knowledgeable, and gifted collector in the field, Charles Hack, who over the past 40 years has built the premier assemblage of Belgian art in North America for the Hearn Family Trust. In anticipation of his retirement from teaching at the end of this academic year, Howe proposed curating one more exhibition in his area of expertise, drawing principally on works in the unparalleled and extensive Hearn Family Trust. Charles Hack generously agreed, and the two set about reviewing the Hearn holdings to define a focus for the exhibition. At first, they proposed an examination of the symbolist landscape. But as they dug deeper, they realized the collection had a larger story to tell about how and why landscape developed from the late Middle Ages to the early 20th century in Belgium as a significant artistic genre. As research progressed, Howe identified works of art to be requested from museums and other private collections to realize the exhibition's narrative. Thus, we owe Jeffery Howe a great debt of gratitude. And with no less appreciation, the museum extends thanks to Charles Hack for his contributions to the discovery process and for making the fruits of his research in assembling the collection over a lifetime available for study. Special thanks are also due the scholars who contributed essays to the catalog from their ongoing research in the field. Now, to bring both of these exhibitions to fruition required the dedication of a strong team of professionals at Boston College. And I want to thank Diana Larson, who designed the exhibition, Kate Schugert, who organized loans and copy edited the catalog, John McCoy, who designed the catalog, and Rachel Chamberlain, who organized today's lectures and the exhibition's accompanying programs. I also want to mention the McMullen's docents, who will be offering tours of the exhibition every Sunday and upon request. There are many others who made important contributions, and I encourage you to read the credits labels on the walls of each exhibition. As always, such a complex project could not have been attempted were it not for the generosity of the administration of Boston College and the McMullen family. And I just spoke to Jackie McMullen this morning in New Jersey, and she's very sorry that she can't be with us today. Major support for Nature's Mirror was provided by Marianne and Vincent Giafuni, and by the patrons of the McMullen Museum, chaired by C. Michael Daly. And now I'm going to turn the program over to the distinguished curator of Nature's Mirror, Jeffery Howe, and let him introduce us to the exhibition. So please join me in congratulating and thanking Jeffery Howe.
Well, thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's such a beautiful day. At least I hope we can reward you with some gorgeous landscapes here. This exhibition, as Nancy intimated, is my graduation present. I came to know Charlie Hack about 40 years ago, almost. I think it was 1978 or so. When I was working on my dissertation, he was just starting to collect works by Ferdinand Knopf. And we literally grew up together. As I delved deeper and deeper into symbolist art, and he collected extraordinary works. The end rooms of our exhibition have, 16 beautiful landscapes by Ferdinand Knopf, and many others by Leon Stilliard, William de Gouve de Nunc. Don't worry if you've never heard of anyone and can't spell the names of the artists. This is going to be a voyage of discovery for you. And I have to reiterate Nancy's thanks to everyone who made this exhibition possible and made it look good. Kate and Diana and John and Rachel really make us look better. Not as good as the works, but they do keep us from getting in the way. And this exhibition, I've just got the title images up here now, as Nancy said, started out with a concept. We were just going to look at the 19th century works, and actually that would have been a fine exhibition, the late 19th century. But Charlie also has this extensive collection of old master prints and drawings and a wide range of 19th century art that I thought, there's really a chance to tell the whole story of the evolution of landscape as an independent genre from the late 15th century to the 20th. And in the way that the landscape is used to mirror different social, economic, intellectual, psychological, and spiritual concerns. The idea of a mirror, of course, is well established in the history of art. And one of the best sellers of the 15th century as a book was, of course, The Mirror of Human Salvation. Speculum salvans, whatever, in Latin. But at first, landscape is used more as a setting, a background, even with such great artists as Albrecht Dürer. Dürer, of course, is German, but he spent a year in Antwerp in 1520 to 21. And while he was there, he met a guy named Joachim Patinier, who's usually credited as being the first landscape painter. And Dürer wrote back to a friend that, yes, Patinier, der gute Landschaftsmaler, it's the first usage of the term landscape painter. So recognizing the contribution of the lowlands. Belgium as an independent country, of course, doesn't exist yet. We have to wait till 1830 for that. But it has a long established identity, regional, local, and artistic. Dürer's, this is a beautiful print here of the Nativity, and we see the landscape glimpsed in the distance beyond the architecture as a setting, for the Holy Family there. Good, it worked. And it's also used as a setting for mythological stories that mirror human aspirations, human the human condition. I'm just going to take my watch off so I don't go way over here, as I'm prone to do. Yeah, this is a wonderful print by an artist and publisher, actually the guy who published many of Peter Bruegel's prints, and we'll see a couple in a minute. It's Hieronymus Koch. It's a landscape of the labyrinth of Crete. And it's a kind of a fanciful landscape. It doesn't necessarily depict anything I've seen in Belgium, but it sure doesn't look like Crete either. And there's a wonderful labyrinth there, which is an age-old, or centuries old at least, metaphor for the pilgrimage of life, the voyage of life, the journey. And of course, it's also a warning, a kind of an allegory of taking yourself too seriously and overreaching. In the labyrinth, Daedalus and his son Icarus were imprisoned by King Minos. He had built the labyrinth. Minos said, great, nobody's going to get the secret, so I'm locking you in there. But Daedalus made wings out of wax and feathers. His son Icarus escaped with him, but like most teenagers, drove too fast, flew too high, his wings melted, and he dies. Falls to the earth. So this is a really, really frequently seen image in Flemish art. There's some great paintings by Peter Bruegel and others. This is a kind of a wonderful print by Jacob de Gain. And of course, boy, there's a whole area, a whole subject of the history of printmaking embodied in those first two rooms too. And you see what a complex process this is. Antwerp was one of the great publishing centers of the world in the 16th century and early 17th century. Amsterdam soon after. So the print is actually drawn by one artist and etched or engraved by another, printed perhaps by a third, published. So it's part of the industry. There's a changing landscape of the economy. But again and again, we see themes that mirror moral concerns. This is an allegory of prudence by Peter Bruegel, engraved by Philip Scala, and published by Hieronymus Koch. And of course, prudence, it shows all sorts of human activities that you want to do. You want to lay up food for the winter. You want to gather firewood. You want to consult a doctor, maybe, in the far left corner, a guy holding up a bottle of urine to look at it, uroscopy. You didn't want 16th century medicine. You really didn't. And just in case, you consult a priest. Yeah, prudence, you got to watch. You got to be careful. But Bruegel also carries on to the expansion of the interest in landscape for its own sake. So this print of summer, which is one of a series of 4 seasons, shows us all this daily activity, genre, everyday life. It's July, they're harvesting wheat. They're drinking from this enormous jug of water. They're resting, they're toiling. Some of them have no heads. Peter Bruegel is a kind of a wonderfully droll artist, imaginative. But you have this expansive rolling landscape of Belgium, the Flanders there that we see. Okay, I guess, again, it relates to sort of human industriousness. There's kind of maybe a moral undertone there, but it's kind of a wonderful documentation of life of the times. And as we move through the 17th century, we see more of these kind of images of daily life. Winter is coming. This is Hans Boll, engraved by Peter van Heyden, published by Hieronymus Koch. He was the biggest entrepreneur of the time, really. And it shows a wonderful view of a chateau or castle, here in Flanders, ice. With people skating, falling on their butts, breaking through the ice. Again, I suppose if you're a moralist, you'd say, there's that undertone of human life is slippery. Watch out. prudence again. But it's also just replete with all of this rich imagery of daily life. Likewise, this more rural scene here with a thatched roof cottage and sports. Sports that kind of died out. Well, not hockey, but the idea of playing golf on ice hasn't caught on. It's one of those things that probably seemed like a great idea at the time. But again, people fall through the ice, and certainly it has its own hazards there. It's, again, a portrayal of the local environment. Everything is brought back to their locality. And the artists are fascinated with landscape. So someone like Paul Brill, we have two beautiful drawings by him upstairs. He made a drawing here of an artist sketching a landscape. Art about art. It's a representation about representation. It's quite sophisticated and a beautiful landscape with the tall fir trees, the deep valley beyond, and the little artist seen from the side there to the left, sketching away. Maybe a self-portrait, maybe not specifically, but certainly in concept, yes. And to reinforce that, I jump ahead a couple of centuries to Frans van Leeuwenhoek with his Impressions on the Scheldt River of 1884, up, the river that runs through Antwerp. And this probably is a self-portrait as well, again, absorbed in the activity of making this work of art. And again, a panoramic view of real life, of daily life here. This is Valentin Klotz. Like I said, don't worry if you haven't heard of any of these people. You'll discover them upstairs. It's a view of a church looking down this long perspective of a road and a bridge, and you see the architecture in the background. It's kind of a long horizontal format. Some think he may have used a portable camera obscura to help him make this drawing. It's got a real tautness also, which feels very modern. Kind of anticipating a lot that would happen later in the 20th century. This, on the other hand, seems to more anticipate Raiders of the Lost Ark or something terrifying. This is the 19th century now, and it's by an artist who is associated with the Belgian Revolution and the independence of the nation. Actually, this is one of his most intriguing paintings, Eugène Verboekhoven, mountainous landscape, kindly lent to us by the Met, actually, of the most rickety, vertiginous bridge up in the Ardennes somewhere. I'm afraid of heights. But even if I wasn't, I would be extremely reluctant to go on this. Again, I think, once again, there's a sense of fear, emotions mirrored in the landscape. In the 19th century, they call this the Sublime, a sense of forces larger than yourself. Landscapes that are vast and kind of expand your sense of self or challenge it. Very often the people are very tiny in comparison. Beautiful sky, beautiful light on the rocks, but a little melodramatic. It's interesting because most of his pictures are really boring pictures of sheep, but this one is quite dramatic. And in the 19th century, well, the 16th century had been marked by this expansion of knowledge, of printing, of all the Renaissance and voyages of discovery. But in the 19th century, the perceptions of nature become more intimate but deeper. And local schools of landscape painting grow up. In France, there's Barbizon. In Denmark, there's a school along the coast, Scheveningen. and Worpswede and many places, Hudson River in this country. But in Belgium, they start going to a place just outside Brussels, Tervuren. It's maybe 10 miles, to the west and a little south of Brussels. And by the mid-century, very convenient trolleys. Very quick, easy way to go. And artists would go and visit or even live there for a summer, staying in Tervuren, and walk out and paint these very fresh landscapes. Again, that kind of remind us of Barbizon artists. And in fact, many of these guys, like Kosemans, spent time in Barbizon, knew these people very well. And many of the French, of course, come to Belgium. Courbet, as we saw in one of our last exhibitions here a couple of years ago, spent a lot of time in Belgium. So there's a tremendous Antwerp. But this is a really fresh landscape in the countryside. And I think even more than the Barbizon artists, these pictures have a kind of wonderful luminosity, light and color. I love this one by De Graef. It's reflecting or mirroring his pleasure in landscape, the kind of poetry of the everyday that people like Wordsworth and Coleridge would express. And many other later poets through the century and writers. Joseph Quinault, also this is a little bit late for him, but it's kind of a nice, wonderful picture of this Tervuren-esque school. But it's also got some very modernistic kind of touches. Again, very terrific emphasis on light and color on the scene of the river, and some of the markings on the canvas really draw attention to themselves, making this kind of two-dimensional surface here on the picture. These green flecks here, the single strokes of the brush, just sit on the surface of the canvas, of the water there. Eat your heart out, Monet. Yeah. Well, actually, he was comfortable with what he was doing. Yeah. And Frans van Kyk, what an artist we used for our banner. I'm feeling a little schizophrenic, never knowing which way to look here. But fortunately, all the images are on the projector. This Marsha Twilight. It's this wonderful kind of quiet, luminous subject. Probably somewhere between Brussels and Antwerp. It's not really specified where. But also like the early Dutch landscape artists, tremendously low horizon, lots of sky, and again a very taut horizontal line there, playing off against the kind of depth of the mirroring surface of the water. Well, so far it seems like Belgium's just nature, just unspoiled. Well, in the 19th century, Belgium becomes one of the most industrialized countries in the world, with tremendous coal mines and ironworks in the middle of the country, in areas of Charleroi and Mons, areas known as the Black Country, the Pays Noir, or the Borinage, and the sort of thing that Blake might have described as those satanic mills dominate the landscape. These become a kind of a modern Sublime. Artists, quite a few, turn to them to depict and record now something not so peaceful, but certainly mirroring and reflecting and embodying the cultural and social conditions of the time. This is a little print by Françoise Maréchal of The Valley of the Meuse. And life in the mines was hard, well, awful. Amongst the workforce, women were very prominent, doing back-breaking work, carrying heavy sacks of coal, struggling, both in the mines and outside. On the left is a picture not in our show by Cécile Douard, showing women picking good pieces of coal out of a slag heap. And it's like a mountain. And on the right, I had to put Vincent van Gogh in. Unfortunately, we don't have a Van Gogh, but this is where he first started drawing seriously. He went to the Borinage, to the area around Mons and Charleroi, to be a preacher. And he was lousy at it. He was fired. But, okay, what do you do when everything else goes wrong? You fall back on art. So he goes to art school in Antwerp and in The Hague. And he gets pretty good. But this is one of his early pieces. Gosh, 1879. Women hauling coal. And the pictures by Meunier and Marechal and others are kind of traditional in the way we've been seeing the art so far. But an artist like George Lemon brought a new technique. It's called Neo-Impressionism, where the brushstrokes are broken up into small, tiny touches with the light and color dissolved. It's such a beautiful scene. You forget, oh, we're looking at a factory. And we're seeing puffs of smoke on the left side, billowing out. Lemon is very much a Belgian artist. He made like one trip abroad and made this wonderful painting of the Thames. And we were fortunate that RISD was gracious enough to lend this to us. About 120 works in the exhibition come from Charlie Hack's collection. But he didn't want it to be all about him. He's kind of a modest guy. So he said, make some other loans. Get some other people to contribute. So the Met and RISD and some really, really kind private collectors shared their works with us. Yeah. Now, in the industrialization, there's a lot of wealth coming into Belgium. Really defines the 19th century. And the city of Brussels starts to rebuild itself. What we're looking at is a kind of a snapshot of a vanishing era. There used to be a big river running through the middle of Brussels, the Seine, S-E-N-N-E, not to be confused with some other Seine. It's paved over. You can't find it anymore in Brussels. They made tunnels, paved it. So there's some big, beautiful mid-19th century boulevards over it. This is a painting of a canal when it was still kind of a port, a maritime commerce-oriented city, and a photograph of the Seine, 1856, before it was paved over. Yeah. The landscape reflects all the kind of changes that we enact on it. And let's face it, in Belgium, there's not much that hasn't been touched by humans. It's all constructed, shaped. It's the built environment as much as it is natural. It's an interesting interplay. But there grows up a nostalgia in the face of these rapid changes. And this is really the onrush of the modern world. People say, whoa, let's slow down. Gauguin goes to Brittany. Xavier Mellery goes to Marken. He's asked to go up to this little island in the Netherlands and make drawings and paintings of the people. We've got 3 of them. Here's just one. A village scene where people are still living in this little fishing village. They wear the wooden shoes. They, looks like the women are coming from maybe a religious meeting. There's a lot of evangelical Christianity in Holland at this time. So they're carrying some sort of, probably prayer books. Not sure what the sheep is doing there, but Marken is now connected with a causeway to Amsterdam, so it's not as isolated as it was. It was a kind of a refuge, though. And artists look back, too, with their nostalgia towards the glories of the 15th century and the beginnings of Flemish and Northern painting. William de Goof de Nunc is one of my favorite artists, and you can practice the name later. This is a gorgeous pastel of a shepherd, which I love in the way that it's brought, the figure is brought up right up to the picture plane, up to the surface of the picture, and then we see the deep landscape beyond. He's really consciously emulating the works of Memling or Roger van der Weyden, 15th century painters up north, and there's just one example of the kind of thing he would be doing. Went too fast. Nostalgia. It isn't what it used to be. My heart weeps for other days, the past. This is a gorgeous drawing by Ferdinand Knopf. It was made for an illustration to a book of poetry by Gregoire Leroy. But it wasn't an illustration. Knopf said, oh, no, you don't. I'm not subservient to anyone. This is an accompaniment. This is a riff on the poetry. So it's with the author. My heart weeps for days of yore, for other times. And it shows a woman kissing a mirror. You can see where we get this mirror imagery. It's just everywhere with the water, the reflections. And here's a kind of a magic mirror, a portal. And then beyond the woman is a little scene of Bruges, the entry to the Béguinage. And that's a very specific institution in Belgium. Beautiful, beautiful locale. There's some, many works about the Béguinage upstairs and even some video of it. But there it is. Knopf grew up there as a kid. He lived there for about 5 years as a child. And did this work, he says, from memory. I'll probably believe him. Knopf had become a pretty good landscape painter. His family owned hundreds, well, thousands of acres out in the Ardennes. They owned 3 little villages. When he's out in the Ardennes, whatever he paints, he owned. He's unusual as an artist. He was well off. He uses these scenes of where he spent every summer, both as a kind of an autobiography, mirroring his development, his interest, but the pictures often catch moods, things that are subtle changes, floods, mists, or here, in the rain, typical Belgian theme, or this one of the bridge at Fossé. Very topographically, I mean, he leaves out things that were down by this bridge. There used to be a kind of a oil mill, extracting flax oil. Work and that sort of activity did not interest him. But he liked that old bridge, and he liked, the little shrine behind it. They lived in a big house. It's now a B&B. You can stay in a Knopf room out in Fossé. It is pretty much the middle of nowhere, but it's maybe 30 miles from Bastogne, if you want to locate it geographically. This picture reproduces the corner of his house. And there's a photo of it as it is today. It's pretty much the same. It's a picture that has an extraordinary frame. When you go upstairs, be sure to look at it, because it's a wide wooden surround covered with a fabric or leather-like substance that's had Japanese motifs stamped into it and then painted or stained by the artist, so that it's got several things going on. This rural village of Fossé, you've got Japanism, which is a really big theme and craze in the late 19th century, and his sister, twice. That's her in both of those dark outfits up front. He likes to repeat her. This is a picture known as Memories from 1889, where we see her 7 times. 7 times, the same figure. And it's a picture called Memories. Again, it's about memory and mirrors and his biography, the subjectivity that is typical of symbolism. And there's a little landscape that has the same frame. I discovered this a couple of years ago in a gallery in Brussels and emailed Charlie saying, Charlie, want another picture? And he pounced. Got it. Yeah, it's a wonderful little thing. It's a fresh landscape of one of the little rivers, the Laval or the Ourthe out there. While we were hanging the show, discovered that there's an unknown oil sketch on the back. I don't know what it is. Is that a window? A bridge? Or a guitar in the foreground? Yeah, it's very rough. It needs more research, needs to be cleaned, but you always find things like that when you're actually working with the objects. They tell you stories that, a photograph won't. Nostalgia. Ooh. And a little bit of morbidity. This is an extraordinary drawing that he did again for a writer. There's a lot of contact with literature, from the very beginning in Belgium, but especially in this late 19th century. And this is titled With George Rodenbach, A Dead City. Bruges had become moribund in the 16th century. The harbor silted up. The Emperor Maximilian hated them. So they'd thrown him in prison at one point for 6 months. So the commerce is transferred to Antwerp, and they take off economically. So Bruges, by the 19th century, gained a reputation as a kind of a ghost town. There are frequent references to it being like a modern Pompeii. And Georges Rodenbach wrote a novel, Bruges la Mort, Bruges the Dead. Town fathers hated it because they were trying to build up the commerce of the city. That did bring a tremendous number of tourists, though. And Knopf, who had grown up there, returns to the subject late in his career. Later, at 1904, he does a whole series of memories of Bruges, souvenirs, including this gorgeous pastel of the entrance to the Béguinage. The bridge, the water reflections, the water lilies. Again, eat your heart out, Claude Monet. And very realistic. Now, Knopf claimed he had never been back to Bruges since he was 8. He also claimed he didn't use photographs. He lied. No doubt about it. When he died, they found his closet full of photographic equipment, developer, and tons of photographs, mostly of his sister. So, yeah, don't trust artists. But the theme of nature is the connecting thread. The landscape is a kind of a mirror of all sorts of different concerns, from external, institutional, economic, to very personal and subjective. And every artist, comes to this subject with their own ideas. So that, from Abraham Blomart to Jean-Baptiste de Greffe to Léon Spiliart, just this kind of fascination with the magic of the forest, magic of the landscape. So I could go on, but I won't. But thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the show.